I have this right here.
That's impossible. You know it's true.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mr. Davies.
Beautiful view today. A lot of work ahead.
I never knew about this hidden inscription. It's time to uncover the truth. She holds the key.
I recognize this.
It's you.
Is it? Is it really you?
Oh my God, it's really you.
Yes, it's you. I found you.
Daddy. Grandmother. It's you. I found you. You are one of us.
And I've always felt it.
You do not have our name, Ava, so stop pretending you belong here. The words sliced through the laughter of the grand dining room so suddenly that every sound seemed to fade for a moment. 9-year-old Ava Johnson stood frozen beside the dessert table, her small hands tightening around a folded paper napkin. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across the polished hardwood floors of the Whitmore estate, and beyond the tall windows, thousands of tiny city lights shimmered against the dark evening sky. The annual Whitmore family gathering was supposed to be a celebration, but for Ava, it felt like every other family event she could remember. She was there, yet never truly included. Around her, relatives continued talking, smiling, and sharing stories as though nothing had happened. Some pretended not to hear the comment. Others simply looked away. Ava lowered her eyes and quietly stepped back from the table. She had learned long ago that answering only made things worse. Across the room, portraits of past generations hung on the walls, each one carrying the proud Whitmore name. Ava often stared at those paintings and wondered why she always felt like a visitor in a place she had lived for years. Her guardian, Cynthia Blake, was standing near a group of guests, laughing politely at something one of them had said. She did not notice Ava slipping away toward the hallway. Or perhaps she noticed and chose not to say anything. Ava walked slowly through the enormous house. The sounds of the party grew quieter with every step. She passed family photographs arranged on polished tables, framed memories of vacations, graduations, weddings, and birthdays. In nearly every picture, everyone looked connected. Everyone looked certain of where they belonged. Ava stopped beside a large window overlooking the estate gardens. Moonlight stretched across the stone pathways outside. For a moment, she imagined what it might feel like to hear someone say, "You are one of us." Not because they felt sorry for her, not because they were being polite, because they truly meant it. A lump formed in her throat, but she quickly swallowed it away. She was not the kind of girl who cried easily. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out the one thing she always carried. A faded photograph. The edges were worn from years of handling. The image itself was old and slightly blurred. It showed a smiling woman holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Ava did not know who the woman was. She did not know where the picture came from. She only knew that she had found it years earlier among a box of forgotten belongings and had never been able to throw it away. Something about it felt important, familiar, like a memory she could almost reach but never quite touch. She ran her finger gently across the photograph. Then a voice echoed from the dining room. "Family photo," someone shouted. Laughter followed. Chairs moved. Conversations brightened. Everyone was gathering together. Everyone except her. Ava slipped the photograph back into her pocket and turned away from the window. As she walked toward the staircase, she never noticed that the corner of the old photograph had begun to separate slightly from age, revealing the faintest glimpse of writing hidden beneath the folded edge. The party finally ended a little after 10 o'clock that night. Guests drifted toward waiting cars beneath the glow of lanterns lining the circular driveway, and the Whitmore estate slowly settled into silence. Upstairs, Ava sat cross-legged on her bed beneath a small reading lamp. The faded photograph rested in her hands once again. She could still hear those words from earlier echoing in her mind. "You do not have our name." She stared at the smiling woman in the picture and wondered for the 100th time who she was. The photograph had always felt different from the other objects she owned. It felt important in a way she could never explain. As she turned it over, her thumb caught the loose corner she had not noticed before. The paper shifted slightly. Ava frowned. Carefully, she lifted the peeling edge. The photograph was older than she realized. Time had separated two layers of paper that had once been pressed tightly together. Beneath the folded corner, she saw something unexpected. Faint handwriting. Her heart skipped. She moved closer to the lamp. The letters were faded and partially hidden, but they were there. Someone had written on the back of the picture years ago. Ava gently smoothed the photograph against her knee and squinted. The ink had almost disappeared. She could make out only a few letters. An A, then perhaps another letter beside it. The rest vanished beneath age and wear. She grabbed a notebook from her bedside table and carefully copied what she thought she saw. It did not look like Johnson. It did not resemble any name she recognized. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear. Curiosity. Downstairs, she could hear Cynthia moving through the kitchen. Cabinets opened and closed. Dishes clinked softly. Ava considered taking the photograph downstairs and asking about it. The thought disappeared almost immediately. Every time she had asked questions about her past, the answers had been brief. You were very young. There is nothing special to tell. Focus on the future. Yet tonight felt different. The hidden writing changed everything. Ava looked at the picture again. The woman holding the baby wore a necklace she had never noticed before. A small silver charm hung from it. For some reason, the sight made her feel strangely emotional. She could not explain why. She carefully placed the photograph inside her notebook and slid it beneath her pillow. Then she turned off the lamp and climbed into bed. Moonlight spilled across the room through tall windows overlooking the estate grounds. Sleep should have come easily after the long evening, but her mind refused to settle. Somewhere inside the darkness, a question kept returning. If the photograph contained a hidden name, what else had been hidden? The next morning, sunlight streamed across her bedroom floor. Ava woke earlier than usual. The first thing she reached for was the notebook beneath her pillow. She opened it quickly. The photograph slipped onto the blanket. This time, as morning light struck the faded paper from a different angle, more of the writing became visible. Only a few additional marks. Barely enough to form a clue, but enough to convince her that the name on the back was real. And somewhere beyond the walls of the Whitmore estate, someone might know exactly what it meant. 3 days later, the question still refused to leave Ava's mind. Every spare moment, she found herself staring at the faded photograph, searching for details she might have missed before. On Saturday afternoon, Cynthia drove her to a charity event held in downtown Chicago. The ballroom occupied the top floor of a luxury hotel overlooking the river, where sunlight reflected off glass towers and painted silver patterns across the water below. Wealthy donors, business leaders, and reporters filled the room. Ava usually stayed close to the walls during events like this. She had learned that adults rarely noticed quiet children standing alone. While Cynthia spoke with guests near the entrance, Ava wandered toward a display of historical photographs arranged along one side of the ballroom. Large black and white images showed the city decades earlier. She studied them quietly until a familiar voice from nearby caught her attention. Mr. Whitmore just arrived. Several guests immediately turned toward the entrance. Richard Whitmore stepped into the ballroom surrounded by organizers and staff members. At 63, he carried himself with calm confidence. His silver hair and tailored navy suit made him easy to recognize. Conversations softened as people greeted him. Ava had seen photographs of him many times. Nearly everyone in Chicago knew who he was. She watched him from across the room for only a moment before returning her attention to the photograph hidden inside her notebook. Curious about the faded writing, she pulled it out again. The paper felt fragile in her hands. She tilted it toward the sunlight streaming through the windows, hoping to make out more of the name. At that exact moment, Richard Whitmore happened to glance in her direction. His eyes settled on the photograph. Then he stopped walking. The people beside him continued forward before realizing he was no longer moving. Richard stared across the ballroom. For a second, he looked as though he had forgotten where he was. Ava noticed the expression immediately. Surprise. Not the polite kind adults often showed children. Something deeper. Something personal. Richard slowly took a step closer. Then another. His gaze never left the photograph. One of the event organizers spoke to him, but he seemed not to hear. Ava lowered the picture slightly, confused by his reaction. When he finally reached her, he looked not at her face, but at the photograph itself. "May I see that?" he asked softly. Ava hesitated. The photograph was the one possession she truly cared about. Yet something in his voice felt different. She carefully handed it to him. Richard took the photograph with both hands. The moment he saw the image clearly, The color drained from his face. The ballroom noise seemed to disappear around him. His eyes moved slowly across the faded picture, then toward the partially visible writing hidden beneath the loose corner. His hand trembled slightly. For several long seconds, he said nothing at all. Ava watched him carefully. "Do you know who she is?" she asked. Richard looked up. His eyes appeared distant, as though he were seeing something 20 years in the past. Then he whispered for words that immediately sent a chill through Ava's chest. "Where did you find this?" The question hung between them as the noise of the ballroom slowly returned around the edges of Ava's awareness. Richard Whitmore continued staring at the photograph as though it contained something impossible. Ava shifted her weight nervously. "I found it years ago," she said. "It was inside a box of old things." Richard lowered his eyes back to the image. The woman holding the baby. The faded background. The partially hidden writing beneath the folded corner. Every detail seemed to pull him deeper into a memory he had spent decades trying to understand. Across the ballroom, Cynthia finally noticed where Ava had gone. She excused herself from a conversation and began walking toward them. Richard saw her approaching and immediately straightened. His expression changed. Not completely, but enough to hide the shock that had filled his face moments earlier. Cynthia smiled politely when she reached them. "Ava, there you are." Then she noticed Richard holding the photograph. Her smile disappeared for a fraction of a second. The reaction was small, but Richard saw it. So did Ava. "Mr. Whitmore," Cynthia said. "I hope she is not bothering you." "Not at all," Richard replied calmly. His eyes never left hers. "We were discussing this photograph." Cynthia's posture stiffened. "That old thing," she said quickly. "It is just a picture she found years ago." Ava looked between them. Something felt different. Adults usually ignored the photograph. They certainly never reacted the way Richard had. "Do you know who the woman is?" Richard asked. Cynthia hesitated. Only briefly. No, the answer came too fast. Richard noticed. Ava noticed too. For several uncomfortable seconds, nobody spoke. Sunlight reflected across the ballroom windows, filling the room with pale afternoon gold. Guests laughed and chatted nearby, completely unaware of the tension standing among them. Richard carefully handed the photograph back to Ava. "May I ask another question?" Ava nodded. "Have you ever seen the writing on the back?" Cynthia answered before Ava could. "It is faded beyond recognition." Richard slowly turned toward her. "That was not my question." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ava reached into her notebook and unfolded the page where she had copied the letters she could make out. Richard examined it carefully. The moment he saw the markings, something changed in his eyes again. Recognition. Not certainty, but recognition. His gaze drifted toward the far windows overlooking the Chicago River. 20 years earlier, another photograph. Another child. Another name. Pieces of memories he had buried long ago began rising to the surface. He suddenly realized he needed answers. Real answers. "Ava," he said gently, "would you mind if I looked into this for you?" Ava blinked. Nobody had ever offered before. Nobody had ever seemed interested. "Why?" she asked softly. Richard looked at the photograph one more time. Then he met her eyes. Because sometimes old photographs remember things that people choose to forget. For the first time since finding the hidden writing, Ava felt a strange sense of hope. Small, fragile, but real. She did not know why a billionaire she had just met seemed so affected by a faded picture. She did not know why Cynthia suddenly looked nervous. And she certainly did not know that before the day ended, Richard Whitmore would order his private archives opened for the first time in nearly 2 decades. That evening, long after the charity event ended, Richard Whitmore sat alone inside the private archive room beneath the headquarters of Whitmore Industries. The room had not been opened in years. Dust-covered storage boxes lined steel shelves from floor to ceiling, each one containing fragments of family history, legal records, photographs, and personal correspondence dating back decades. A single desk lamp cast a circle of warm light across the table where the faded photograph now rested beside several old family albums. Richard loosened his tie and carefully opened another box. His mind kept returning to Ava's face. More specifically, to the strange feeling he experienced the moment he saw that photograph in her hands. It was not merely recognition. It was memory. Somewhere in the past, that image belonged to a story he had never finished understanding. Across town, Ava sat on the floor of her bedroom, looking out at the estate gardens as evening settled over the property. She could not stop thinking about the conversation. Nobody had ever shown interest in the photograph before. Nobody had ever looked at it as though it mattered. For the first time in years, she felt as though the answers she had been searching for might actually exist. Downstairs, Cynthia seemed unusually distracted during dinner. She barely touched her food. Twice she checked her phone. Several times she appeared lost in thought. Ava noticed, but said nothing. Meanwhile, Richard continued searching through records from 20 years earlier. Hour after hour passed. Then, shortly before midnight, he opened a thin leather-bound album tucked inside the back of a storage box. His breath caught immediately. Inside was another photograph. Different angle. Same woman. The same necklace with the small silver charm. Richard stared at the image. His heart began to race. He turned the page. More photographs appeared. Family gatherings. Hospital visits. Birth announcements. Then he stopped. One photograph showed the woman standing beside someone Richard recognized instantly. His late daughter, Eleanor. For several seconds he could not move. Memories flooded back. Eleanor had once spoken about a close friend who helped her through difficult years. Richard remembered brief conversations, half-forgotten names, stories he had dismissed because business always seemed more urgent at the time. He reached for an old folder stored beneath the album. The file contained handwritten notes, invitation lists, and personal letters. As he sorted through the papers, a single document slipped free and landed on the table. Richard picked it up. At the top was a name. His eyes widened. The first letters matched the faded writing Ava had copied into her notebook. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to send a chill through him. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the paper. The missing pieces were beginning to connect. A photograph, a forgotten friendship, a child, a hidden name. Somewhere inside this mystery was the reason Ava had always felt like an outsider. And for the first time in 20 years, Richard believed he was close enough to the truth to touch it. The following morning arrived gray and cool, with low clouds drifting above the Chicago skyline. Ava sat quietly at the breakfast table while Cynthia moved around the kitchen with unusual impatience. Coffee brewed. Cabinets opened and closed. Yet neither of them said much. Ava kept thinking about the photograph and the promise Richard Whitmore had made. Somewhere, answers were waiting. She could feel it. Across the city, Richard had barely slept. The document he discovered the night before remained spread across his desk beside the photographs and letters from the archives. As sunlight filtered through the windows of his office, he carefully compared the faded handwriting from Ava's notebook to the name written on the old record. The similarities were impossible to ignore. A few letters were damaged by time, but enough remained to reveal something remarkable. The name hidden beneath the photograph was not Johnson. It was not Blake. It was a completely different surname. One connected to a chapter of family history that had vanished more than 20 years earlier. Richard immediately contacted a trusted family attorney and requested access to additional records. By mid-morning, several old files had been delivered to his office. Birth records, hospital registrations, personal correspondence. Piece by piece, a forgotten story began emerging from the past. Meanwhile, Ava spent the day at the estate library, pretending to read while constantly glancing toward the driveway outside. She did not know why she expected something to happen. She simply felt that life was changing. Shortly after noon, a black sedan appeared at the front gate. Her heart skipped. Minutes later, a staff member entered the library. "Mr. Whitmore is here to see you," he said. Ava immediately stood. She found Richard waiting in a sunlit sitting room overlooking the gardens. He greeted her with a gentle smile, but she noticed something different in his expression. He looked thoughtful, serious, as though he carried information too important to rush. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said. Ava nodded. "Did you find something?" Richard glanced toward the photograph she carried in her notebook. "I found more than I expected." Before he could continue, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Cynthia entered the room and stopped abruptly when she saw them together. Her expression tightened. Richard remained calm. "Please join us," he said. The invitation sounded polite, but it left little room for refusal. Cynthia slowly sat down. Silence filled the room. Outside, a breeze moved through the gardens, stirring leaves beneath the afternoon sun. Richard opened a folder and removed several copies of old documents. For many years, he began carefully. Certain parts of this story were missing. Cynthia lowered her eyes. Ava watched both adults, sensing the tension between them. Richard placed one document on the table, then another. Finally, he set down a photograph from the archives. The same woman from Ava's picture appeared in it, standing beside Richard's daughter, Eleanor. Ava stared at the image. Her pulse quickened. "I knew her," Richard said quietly. "And I believe the name hidden on the back of your photograph belongs to someone my family has been searching for far longer than you can imagine." The room fell completely silent. Ava stared at the photographs spread across the table, while Cynthia sat motionless beside her. Outside the tall windows, sunlight drifted across the gardens, but inside the sitting room, every second seemed suspended. Richard Whitmore carefully opened another folder and removed a worn envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. "This belonged to my daughter Eleanor," he said softly. Ava looked up. Richard's voice carried the weight of memories he had not spoken about in years. Before she passed away, Eleanor spent a great deal of time helping a young woman named Mariah Bennett. Ava's eyes immediately moved toward the photograph. "The woman in the picture?" Richard nodded. "Yes." He slid a letter from the envelope and placed it beside the photograph. Mariah trusted Eleanor. They were close friends. When difficult circumstances entered her life, Eleanor tried to help her protect something very important. Cynthia lowered her gaze toward the floor. Richard noticed, but continued. "For years, I believed that story ended without answers." He unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting matched the style found on the back of Ava's photograph. Several lines had faded, but one sentence remained clear enough to read. Richard's eyes moved across the page before stopping. "There is a name here," he said. "The same name that appears beneath the folded corner of the photograph." Ava felt her heart racing. She had imagined this moment many times, yet now that it was happening, she almost felt afraid to hear the answer. Richard looked at her gently. "The surname hidden on the photograph is Bennett." Ava blinked. The name meant nothing to her. Yet the moment it was spoken aloud, Cynthia closed her eyes. Richard noticed immediately. "You recognize it," he said quietly. Cynthia remained silent. The room seemed to grow even stiller. Ava turned toward her. "You know that name?" Cynthia's hands tightened in her lap. For several long moments, she said nothing. Then she slowly nodded. Ava stared at her in disbelief. "Why did you never tell me?" Cynthia looked toward the photograph resting on the table. "Because I thought I was protecting you." Richard's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. Protecting her from what? Cynthia swallowed hard. From a past that was never fully understood. Ava felt emotions she could barely sort through. Confusion, hope, hurt. Questions she had carried for years suddenly seemed closer to being answered. Richard opened another document and compared it to the photograph. Dates, locations, names. The details aligned with surprising accuracy. Every new piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. "Ava," Richard said gently, "I cannot make promises until every record is verified. But I can tell you this. The name you have carried all your life may not be the name you were born with." The words settled over the room like a quiet storm. Ava looked down at the faded photograph she had guarded for years. The picture no longer felt like a mystery from someone else's life. For the first time, it felt like a doorway leading directly toward her own. A gentle rain began falling outside as afternoon faded toward evening. Tiny droplets traced paths across the tall windows of the sitting room, while silence lingered between the three people gathered around the table. Ava stared at the photograph, unable to look away from it. The name Bennett echoed through her thoughts again and again. For years, she had wondered where she came from. For years, every answer had led nowhere. Now, for the first time, the mystery was beginning to take shape. Richard Whitmore carefully opened the final folder he had brought with him. Inside were copies of hospital records, old correspondence, and a photograph that appeared newer than the others. He placed it beside the faded picture Ava had carried for years. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same silver charm necklace. The same woman. The same warm smile. Ava leaned closer. "It is her," she whispered. Richard nodded. "I believe so." Cynthia remained unusually quiet. Her eyes never left the documents spread across the table. Richard slowly removed another sheet of paper and slid it forward. This arrived from the records office. An hour ago. Ava looked down. The page contained dates, signatures, and information she did not fully understand. Richard pointed to a line near the center. "This record lists a child connected to Mariah Bennett." Ava felt her heart pounding. What does it say? Richard took a careful breath. It says the child was temporarily placed under protective guardianship after a series of family circumstances that were never fully resolved. Ava looked toward Cynthia. Was that me? Cynthia closed her eyes briefly before answering. Yes. The room became still. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Ava waited for more. For years of questions, she finally wanted the truth. Cynthia folded her hands together. When you were very young, there was confusion. Records were incomplete. People disagreed about what should happen. I was asked to care for you until permanent answers could be found. But they never were. Ava asked. Cynthia shook her head slowly. No, Richard looked down at the photograph. Until now. He opened one final envelope. Inside was a copy of a letter written by Eleanor many years earlier. The paper had faded, but the handwriting remained clear enough to read. Richard's voice softened as he read aloud. If anything happens, please make sure she knows who she is. Please make sure she knows her name matters. Ava felt tears gathering in her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. The sentence seemed written directly for her. Richard carefully placed the letter beside the photograph. Then he revealed the final page beneath it. At the top was the complete name that matched the hidden writing on the back of Ava's photograph. Not partially visible, not faded, complete. For several seconds nobody spoke. Ava stared at the page as though it might disappear if she looked away. The mystery she had carried for years was no longer hidden beneath folded paper and missing records. The truth had finally emerged. And for the first time in her life, she was looking directly at the name she had been born with. For a long moment, Ava could do nothing except stare at the name on the page. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the sitting room remained completely silent. Years of questions seemed to gather around that single moment. Every time she had felt different. Every time she had wondered why she never quite fit in. Every time someone made her feel like she did not belong. The answers had been waiting inside a faded photograph all along. Richard Whitmore watched her carefully. His eyes were filled not with triumph, but with compassion. He understood that discovering the truth was not the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a new one. Ava slowly looked up from the document. So this is really my name? She asked. Richard nodded gently. Every record we have found points to the same conclusion. Ava lowered her eyes again. The name felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Like hearing a song she somehow recognized without remembering where she had heard it before. Across the table, Cynthia finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. I should have told you sooner. Ava looked at her. There was no anger in Cynthia's face now. Only regret. When I became responsible for you, there was confusion everywhere. Records were incomplete. People disagreed about what was best. As time passed, I convinced myself that leaving the past alone would protect you. She paused and took a slow breath. But keeping the truth hidden only made you feel alone. Ava listened carefully. For years she had believed nobody understood how it felt to stand on the outside looking in. Yet now she realized that some people had been carrying their own burdens too. Richard folded the old letter and placed it beside the photograph. Your name matters, he said softly. But it is not the only thing that matters. Ava looked at him. What do you mean? Richard smiled. A name can tell you where your story begins. It does not decide who you become. The words settled gently in her heart. Outside, the rain was beginning to stop. Sunlight pushed through the clouds, sending golden reflections across the wet gardens beyond the windows. For the first time in years, Ava no longer felt like a question waiting to be answered. She felt seen. Richard reached into the folder and removed the faded photograph one last time. He handed it back to her. You should keep this. Ava held it carefully. The worn edges no longer represented a mystery. They represented a connection, a bridge between the life she knew and the life she had finally begun to understand. Richard stood and walked toward the window. My daughter once believed every child deserved to know where they came from, he said quietly. I think she would be very happy today. Ava smiled. Small at first, then genuine. The kind of smile that comes when a weight finally begins to lift. As the last raindrops slid from the glass and sunlight filled the room, she realized something important. The people who once called her an outsider had never truly defined her. The truth had, and now that truth was finally hers to carry forward.